All right, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Aloha Friday to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us here on your Central Valley Live. My name is Gabe Salazar. Well, we are hours away from the Labor Day weekend, so definitely a reminder here to enjoy responsibly. We are live across all of our digital platforms, including our app, our website, and of course, Facebook Live. So we also want to hear from you. If you want to leave a shout out, send over a comment or question, just hop onto our CBS 47 Facebook page and just type it in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get through all of it. So we are the Central Valley's one and only interactive digital streaming show, providing you with all the latest news, even when we are off the air, right at your fingertips. So right now, a live look outside on our Skycam. So beautiful day to get our Labor Day weekend started. A clearer picture of Fresno. So seasonal temperatures are expected across the valley again today. Highs will be in the low 90s today before it actually starts to warm back up slightly for the weekend. So haze can also be expected in the daylight hours of tomorrow. So definitely want to keep that in mind for your Labor Day forecast. It's going to be a toasty one. Highs at about 103 can be expected. So definitely don't want to forget your sunblock. So moments ago, we did hear from the Fresno Police Department as they did provide us with an update on its efforts to crack down on gang violence as well. So as we take a look at some video now, you can see some of what we got earlier today. So we did hear from Fresno Police Chief Paco Balderrama, and he has announced an arrest in the city's 52nd homicide, and he's crediting the department's newly formed gang suppression team on those efforts. So Balderrama says the team also conducted a warrant operation on Thursday, visiting different areas known to have heavy gang activity. And joining us now to talk more about this is our very own Adrian Thomas, who actually spoke to the police chief earlier at today's press conference. So Adrian, what have you learned today?
So today, the police chief, Paco Balderrama, he gave an update on the gang suppression efforts from the police department, which started in early August. He also gave an update on police reforms being implemented in late 2020. The Fresno, in about fall of 2020, rather, the Fresno Police Reform Commission was formed, and that was in response to basically the nationwide conversation about policing that we saw last summer in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. This reform here this reform commission here in Fresno was tasked with coming up with recommendations for the Fresno Police Department, and there was a list of over 70 recommendations, and so the chief discussed some of those recommendations that he has already implemented, and discussed some that are still in talks as well.
Yeah, so one part of it was the different recommendations. I believe there were 73 of them, some of them which were implemented, some of them that he just plain did not want to implement. And then the other part too was the warrant sweep, right? Mm-hmm. So how many locations did they go to?
So they went to several locations throughout the city. He didn't really go into specific details on where, but this warrant operation, in relation to the gang suppression effort, this was a huge boost just in the progress of the gang suppression effort, which began in early August. So the big warrant operation sweep was yesterday, but it's the effort has gone on since August 5th, and the chief announced today there have been over 400 arrests. 154 of those are felonies. So it's He's saying this is having a significant impact just in the amount of violent crime we are seeing. Yeah. It has been a violent year in Fresno so far. We are at, just after Wednesday, 52 homicides this year compared to last year it was 27. The chief did say, though, that these efforts, he feels, are reducing the rate at which we are seeing shootings and homicides, despite the fact that we've already had such a violent year.
Right. So in this warrant operation sweep, they visited 6 to 7 different locations where they do suspect to be heavily gang so either association or activity. And then also he mentioned just the number of shootings in total. So it was pretty startling because this time last year there were about 400 or so, and this time it's just a little bit more than that. So was he attributing that number to the success of the gang suppression team cracking down on the number of total shootings and all?
Yes, he did say that the kind of increased focus on gang-related violence is, as he feels, having somewhat of an impact. I mean, time will tell to see the actual effectiveness of this, but he did say that the rate at which we're seeing homicides, gun violence, is going down proportionately, and as compared to months earlier this year. One of the things he did talk about is, he assumed, the role as police chief in January of this year, and since January, the number of homicides we have seen have only been in the single digits each month. I mean, granted, we are seeing a much higher homicide rate in Fresno, but he did talk about how, in a lot of 2020, month to month, Fresno was seeing double digits in terms of the number of homicides. So he feels the rate at which we're seeing homicides in Fresno is going down because of these efforts.
Yeah, and then going back to the different recommendations, so 73 in all, some of them which he does not plan on implementing. So what were some of the recommendations that he does not plan on implementing?
The big one was school resource officers. There has kind of been this movement to take school resource officers out of schools in Fresno, and that's something that Chief Balderrama said he will not do, but rather go to the school districts and have a conversation with them on how can we make these better, or how can we make these positions more beneficial to the students and to the communities. One of the things he talked about was essentially just changing the role and not using these officers to discipline students who may act up, but simply be there to keep the peace, but also just build community trust of people in Fresno and police officers from a young age. So I think again, time will tell, but if the police department has these conversations with the school districts about, okay, do not use these school resource officers to discipline kids, the disciplinary actions are left up to the schools. These officers are here to build community trust and keep the peace.
And again, this is just coming in the heels of the incident that happened recently in the Central versus Bullard High School game, right? If the school resource officers weren't there, who knows what could have happened, right? So that's another thing that they mentioned as well. And so talking about now the recommendations that are going to be implemented.
So the recommendations that are going to be implemented that the chief highlighted was essentially about de-escalation. With any sort of situations. Going into a situation where there might be a suspect or an arrest they need to make, and if it does have potential to become hostile or violent, going as opposed to going in ready to take action, how can we engage with the person we're trying to contact and reduce the chance of violence. One of the other recommendations that they're implementing is that officers must carry at least one less than lethal weapon with them. Right. So, that's anything from tasers to pepper spray to anything that could maybe disarm someone, but not hurt them, not fatally hurt them. Another thing that the chief talked about, a recommendation that's being implemented, is that I guess a lot of officer-involved shootings, that, according to the chief, happen when officers reach into moving vehicles. Okay. They might be trying to apprehend somebody. They reach into a moving vehicle. That car speeds off. They feel like they need to use their firearm. So having more clear, concise rules about when to reach into a vehicle, when not to reach into a vehicle. One of the things that the chief talked about with me off camera was, he did mention this a little bit in the news conference, but he said, this will have a huge impact once this really gets revamped, but is their crisis intervention team. And essentially what that is, that's having not necessarily police officers, but somebody who's trained to address mental health crises, respond to mental health calls. The chief said that does exist right now in the Fresno Police Department, but they're looking at ways to bolster that, to revamp that a little bit. One of the things he told me off camera was that if the crisis intervention team can get more funding, can be expanded, can really be supported, that could really reduce the number of use of force incidents that we see. Because when officers are called out to a mental health call,
Yeah.
If somebody's having a crisis, police officers aren't necessarily going to be the best people to respond to that effectively, and that's what we do see, unfortunately, sometimes, of officers using force with people who are experiencing a mental health crisis, when really a different approach probably could have been more effective. And that's something that the chief says he is committed to finding a better plan to implement, rather.
Yeah, so it seems like a huge focus of today's press conference was just clarifying some of the policies that weren't so clear-cut in the past, and then just solidifying them. Like you mentioned, the part about if an officer is engaging in a moving car, there's a specific instance where there's a child in the car. Of course, you wouldn't want the child to take control of that. That's why, in that instance, an officer would have to actually go inside the vehicle. And of course, that huge focus on just the de-escalation policies. I know he also mentioned that that's something that wasn't so clear-cut in the department's policies, but now that they have addressed that recommendation, that's going to be more clear for officers to consider as well. So you're going to have more for us tonight. What can we expect from you later, and who else did you talk to?
We're trying to get statements right now from some of the folks who've really been a part of the police reform commission, and as well as Advanced Peace. That's a group that the police department actually helps fund, that kind of works as like a liaison between the communities where we are seeing high rates of gang violence, and they kind of be a bridge between those communities and the police department and the rest of the city. So just kind of their thoughts on how they feel the implementation of these recommendations are going so far. But I just think the highlight of today's news conference from the chief was the fact that they feel their gang suppression efforts are going well, and that they do remain committed to addressing these recommendations and implementing them, the recommendations that were brought forth by the Police Reform Commission.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for keeping us updated. We'll have more from you tonight. What time can we expect that?
5 o'clock on 5 and 6 on KC24 and CBS 47.
All right, perfect. Sounds good. And we'll, of course, have more on our website, yourcentralvalley.com as well. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks, Gabe.
All right, and just a reminder here, as we do head into the holiday weekend, the Fresno Police Department will also hold a DUI checkpoint beginning tomorrow night at 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. at an undisclosed location within Fresno city limits. So checkpoint locations are chosen based on just a history of DUI crashes and arrests, so definitely do be careful driving out there. When in doubt, get an Uber, and hopefully you won't be another statistic. And also just a reminder, if you are planning to go off the grid this Labor Day weekend, the Forest Service closed 20 million acres across California to the public use for more than 2 weeks, but many state parks, federal parks, wildlife areas, and private campgrounds, and some other federal lands will remain open. So again, all national forests in California will be closed through at least September 17. Yosemite National Park will remain open, though visitors will have to make a reservation prior to their visit. If you do want to know if your Labor Day plans have been foiled, we do have an article on our website, yourcentralvalley.com, as well, that you can use as a reference under the digital exclusives tab. So I'll leave you with this shot here of Fresno, and until next time, I'm Gabe Salazar. See you here then. Thank you.